It's a rare condition this day and age to read any good news on the newspaper page. And love and tradition of the grand design, some people say, is even harder to find. Well, then there must be some magic clue inside these gentle walls. 'Cause all I see is a tower of dreams, real love bursting out of every scene. Days go by, it's the bigger love of the family.
What's up, everybody? Good to see you. Noon service. You're my favorite service. Give it up for yourselves. You're just awesome. You're just awesome. And no, I did not say that the previous two. All right, I promise. But it's great to see you. I want to welcome anybody that's watching online. Speaking of Veterans Day, thank you all. If you are a man or woman serving our country, a soldier overseas, this is awesome that we feel like we can still be a part of a little bit of family, but I hope you're doing well, and we're thinking of you. We honored you today, and right now we honor you in our minds and our hearts. So appreciate what you do, and then you all are with us physically in the room, and I'm glad you are. So we've been in this series. I think this is week number 6, about family matters, and just talking about, it all starts right here with our heart, but talking about like our individual family, and your heart flows into all relationships around you, and then talking about what does it look like to be church family, and what does it look like at Rock Hills Church to be family, a generous family is what we're going to talk about today. What does that look like to be a generous family? And we've talked about a lot of different subjects, and this one will be no different than the other weeks. It all starts right here with our heart and overflows, and that'll be the same for this topic today as well. So I'm glad you all are with us as we talk about this. I have a ladder up here that I don't know if you noticed. You probably did, right? So I have a ladder up here that I'm going to refer to at the end of the service, okay? And at Rock Hills, we talk about this every single week. We talk about the importance of taking next steps. I believe it was C.S. Lewis that said, what saves a man is a step and another step. And we believe that when it comes to salvation, it's immediately through faith in Christ. But as we walk out this journey of faith, it's step after step. We always have steps to take. So I'm going to talk about that later on when it comes to you and I's relationship journey with Jesus, always taking steps. And I have many more steps to take, and that's the way it will always be. I will not have arrived because I'm on a journey to be more like Christ, and there is much meat on the bone still yet for me in this journey with Jesus. So today, focusing on what does it mean to be a generous family. And so as I say that, I want you to kind of ask yourself this question. Do you know any radically generous families? Can you think of anybody in your life that you would say, man, they are radically generous? I hope you do, because they're actually fun to think about, fun to talk about. Honestly, I kind of have thought this week about, hey, who's a family that I know that I would say is radically generous? And I had a couple, I know lots of people that are generous, but I had a couple families that really stuck out to me. And as I thought about that, I was kind of fun. As I thought about them, I couldn't help but smile. And it's just a principle in itself that if you know someone that's probably pretty generous, they're probably pretty joyous. I've not yet met a very generous person that was grumpy. Now, maybe you know some. Hopefully you're not one, right? Well, it's good to be generous, but it's hard to be generous and not be joyous, and that kind of goes hand in hand. So as I thought about this family, and you can think about the family you have in your mind, I thought about, like, I have watched this family, and it's been fun to do so. And it's kind of fun to cheer on a generous family. I've watched them do things like call the utility company and pay a month utilities for somebody that was in a tight time. I've watched them, pay it forward at the drive-thru for the meal behind them. They've actually done that quite a bit. I've watched this family scholarships some students that needed some help. I've watched this family take people that didn't have a family in, make them a part of their own family. And all the while, within, it's a family that's real. This isn't fictitious family I'm talking about. So they have their own challenges. They have their own struggles. But they take care of one another. But they don't just do that. they look to meet the needs of other people, not only locally, but this family, like globally. They feed starving children. They've helped bring water to areas that didn't have clean drinking water. They've just done some amazing things along the way, helped people pay off debt, given a car away to a family. Like, when I think about this family, it's just fun to think about. And so here's the reality for all of us today as we talk about what does it mean to be a generous family. It can be more fun to talk about than try to be one. And as soon as I say that, when we talk about in a church generosity, sometimes the temperature in the room can change because I'm not just going to talk about money today. I'm going to talk more important about generosity. And as we talk about generosity, I know sometimes for different settings and for some people it can be a little bit of a tense topic, and I hope it's not. I'm trying really hard today to disarm people so it's not tense for them. But it's sometimes easier to admire. I mean, when you think about a generous family, that should be fun. It's kind of fun to think about, and it kind of even gives me joy. I borrow some of theirs, right? It's just kind of fun. But I've learned that it's easier to admire. It's harder to emulate sometimes. And when you start talking about generosity, yeah, let's talk about what it looks like. But when we personalize it, it can become tense. So just to kind of take the tense out of the room today, would you turn to the person next to you and just tell them what you make? And that should really help out. So don't do that. Just kidding. Some of you started to do that. Don't do that. That'd be strange. And we're not going to do that today. So spoiler alert. Some of you don't know me. Some of you do. But trust me. Well, it'd be hard if you don't know me. But for those of you that are new, I have you in mind, okay? And so I just want to let you know at the end, I'm not going to try to make you cry and then get your wallet out. Every week, we do what we call receive our tithes and offering. We're going to do that like we do every week, but there's no special offering in addition to this. In fact, I would say this. If you've prepared to give, go for it. And I'm not going to tell you not to give because that's really Jesus' deal, right? So who am I to rob you of a blessing? But here's the thing. If you are unsure or skeptical because you're like, I knew it. I come to church, and every time I go to church, they talk about money. Churches just talk about money. Well, you just keep sitting on your wallet, all right? Because more than money, I'm going to talk about an attitude of generosity. Because generosity isn't a money amount, it's an attitude. It really is. And I'm not just talking about it to try to make you feel guilty. I'm going to talk about it today because honestly, it'll set you free from greed. And today, I hope that somebody be set free from greed because we got a lot of stress in life, and I'd love for you to walk more joyous. And I'd love for you to experience, and me too, to be honest, the type of family that other people would say, like, man, they're a radically generous family, and they help me have joy just by the way that they live. That's the goal of today, all right? And so, in fact, I would say that this is kind of interesting. If you'd say, I knew it, church is just about money. I used to think those thoughts. I still sometimes think those thoughts. But when it comes to this church, right, I think a little different. But in our 3-year existence, this is my 3rd time talking about generosity. So if you think every time I come to church they talk about money, then perhaps God wanted to tell you something because this is our 3rd time in 3 years. I don't think that's a coinky-dink, all right? I'm just saying. So you'll have to figure that out. But our goal today will be talking about generosity because it all comes back to our hearts, all right? And so no matter where you come from, maybe you're just checking out church, maybe somebody invited you, maybe you're a longtime follower of Jesus. I think this will be beneficial for all of us. I really do believe that generosity can help bring some joy and some peace in our life, and I think that's probably something we all need. And so, when Lacey and I were like newlyweds, early married, right? I had a boss that gave me some very wise wisdom. Lacey was in college, and as long as she was in college, her dad was paying, she had some scholarship, but he was paying some of her school, most of her school. And quite frankly, all of her school, I think. So now I think about it. And so she had some scholarships, but her dad was helping her. And so my boss said, hey, you should wait. And Lacey was a junior. And he said, you should wait till she graduates before you marry her because then you have to pay her college bill. You should let her dad. That was wise. That was good wisdom. And but I was a teapot ready to whistle, so I was ready to get married, I had lots of friends, didn't need another friend, needed a wife, all right? So I said, let's do this. And so I took on some school debt. It was worth it. So worth it. And so we got married, though. When we got married, we were newly married. We were living on love, y'all. Like, we didn't have a lot of money. We everybody's scenario is different. It's all about perspective. But for us in that setting, we lived in Springfield, Missouri, newlyweds. I would say that the apartment complexes we live were not the best in Springfield, right? I love you, baby. I was trying to give her, good time, good life, and make her real proud about who she married, right? So we lived, but we had benefits. We had benefits. I was a youth pastor at the time, and I kind of thought, like, why make $3,000 in a month when you can make $3,000 every year? So youth pastoring, right? It's great. But we had benefits. We had a dental plan. Chew on the side that doesn't hurt. So that worked out pretty well. And some of you know what I'm talking about. We had where we lived. We had pets that we didn't even pay for, and that was awesome. In the attic, there were 5 raccoons that lived up there, and they just gave them to us. It was really cool. And we had popcorn ceiling. You might know what that is. You know what kind of popcorn ceiling? Some of you apparently have redone those, and you're still bitter about that, but that's okay. But it was cool. It was like festive because it was like winter all the time. Because as the family of raccoons walked, it'd snow. And we knew it's so cute. We knew where they were at any given time. We just could follow the snow. And then one time we were watching 24 when it came out back in the day. And we were in our bedroom watching 24, and here came our little friends, a little snow right above our bed. And we thought, someday they're just going to join us here, and we're going to watch TV together. That's going to be great. And so, we had moments where there were other benefits, like, potlucks. We had tater tot casserole. So we had, we were living on love, y'all, and it was a lot of fun. And I look back to those days, and, it wasn't just a month. It lasted for a while. And she was working her way through school. We got married. I said, I love you, get a job. And so she got a job at the bank while she finished out school. And then I was youth pastoring. And then so we got married, they brought me on full time. I mean, we were raking it in. We weren't. But in those moments, here's what I look back, and I think when times get tough, it can be hard to be generous. Sometimes when times get tight, it can be hard to be generous. But here's a statistical fact in United States of America. This is not a guess. This is a fact. Statistics say that in America, the more we have, the less we give. The more we have, the less we give. So when we say it's tough to be generous in tight times, the truth is the more we have, the harder it is to give because you have more. Now, I ran across an interesting statistic, and this is not to guilt anybody. It's just to really be aware that they said that and Christians in America in church give 2.5% of their income, 2.5% in our current day and age. In the Great Depression, Christians gave 3.3%. I just thought that was intriguing. Because we would think that in tight times it's tougher to be generous, but actually it's all about an attitude, not an amount. And Jesus knows when it comes to our hearts, he knows what our hearts are like, and what he focused on was he wanted to focus on generosity because he knew that was talking to our heart. And as we're here today, as we talk about, this conversation, it becomes realistic and real when we read some things like this, that according to statistics in America, that money is the number one source of anxiety. And that, I don't think any of us would probably disagree with that. The Gallup reports that 64% of all couples argue over money. The number one cause of divorce are financial stress situations. The average American has $15,000 of debt. Now, that's not mortgage or student loan. That's just credit card debt. Some of you are like, man, I'm above average. That's great. It's good. It'll sink in a little longer, baby. Maybe. This is as good as it gets today, so you might as well laugh. That's fine. And so here's my point. Like, this isn't just some thought. I've met with people, I've sit down face to face with people this year that have lost their jobs. I've sat down with people that are arguing and going through a divorce because of lots of issues, but money tends to be one of them. And so I know this is real. And here's my thought today, is not to add stress. It's to talk about a subject that can help relieve some stress. And when it comes to generosity, I believe that the power comes in the presence of Jesus, not just a sermon or not just my opinion. But I believe that because of the presence of Jesus, there is no chaos that his presence cannot calm. I believe that, especially when it comes to the topic of generosity. So Jesus, most importantly, talked about this subject more than he talked about heaven or hell, and that's why we're talking about it today. And he's not just talking about it because he loves the topic of money. He's not like an excited investor. But he talks about it because he knows that it deals with our hearts. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, "Do not store up treasures here on earth, where moth eat them and rust destroys, and where thieves break in and steal. But store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves they don't break in and steal. And then he says something monumental. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Wherever your treasure is, there your heart will also be. What he says, scriptural principle that's true today as it's ever been, is that tied to your treasure is your heart. And the reason Jesus talked about this a lot, because he was always after what got our attention and our affection. And he knew to speak to a heart. And in other words, like, I have my wallet here. And this principle says that wherever my treasure or wherever my wallet goes, guess what follows? My heart. It's as simple as that. It's not difficult. It's just hard to play out in life. And Jesus says, hey, I want your heart. That's what he's looking for. He wants to take us on a step journey of a relationship to be more like him, where we trust in him more despite the circumstances. And he knows that, hey, if wherever my wallet goes, there my heart goes. Anybody old enough like me, you're going to out yourself, but remember Cabbage Patches back in the day? Remember they had a little song? So this is how talented I am. I wrote a song this week. Okay, ready to go? My wallet, wherever it goes, I go. My wallet, my wallet, my wallet and me. Isn't that good? I talked to some college students last service, and they're like, what on earth are you talking about? There used to be a song called My Buddy, My Buddy. Anybody? Good. Good. So, Jesus' principle is simply this. Wherever this goes, my heart goes. Now, that can be concerning, but it can also be quite amazing, because there really aren't any shortcut steps in growth of spirituality. You can't skip the process, because often God will use our circumstances to grow our trust, because he's all about the conversation and he wants dependence on him. But one of the things that we can do that, if it doesn't shortcut it, will certainly speed it up, is to put our treasure into the things of God, because God knows our heart will follow. And that's the principle. Wherever our treasure goes, our heart is connected. And so Jesus wants us to, here's the deal. Generosity is to say, I trust God more than I trust my wallet. Do I serve this thing, or does it serve me? Because Jesus said you can't do both. You're going to have, God will either be your money or I'll be your God, but you can't do both. But Jesus knows that an internal principle, scriptural principle, is that wherever our treasure go, our heart will also go. Now, when I talk about this, because I know me and I know my natural tendency, I tend to think, well, in many seasons of my life, if I had more, I'd give more. But then that whole statistic thing says if I have more, in fact, I give less. And so that's just really hard. But sometimes I just think, well, this would really make sense if in good times there were people that were rich. And so I just kind of want to put all of us Americans, hopefully, I don't know, we're on different seasons, different stages of life, different scenarios. I get that, and I respect that. But just for the sake of us Americans, I just want to share a thought in comparison to the rest of the world. There's a scripture that Paul gives to Timothy, and Timothy was leading a church in Ephesus, and Paul gives him some wisdom. And Paul says this, teach those who are rich in this world. And then at that point, I'm like, yeah, let's talk about those people, because that ain't me. I ain't rich. And so, yeah, let's get them, Paul. So here, rich people, here's what he says. Tell those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust their money, which is unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need. Always be ready to share with others. By doing this, and here comes that principle that Jesus just talked about, it's reinforced. By doing this, they will be strong, or they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future, so that they may experience true life. So we hear that, I'm like, for me, I'm like, yeah, Rich, you should share what you have, right? And I get a pass today because that ain't me. I'm not rich. I just want to share some statistics that really have helped me understand that maybe I have more than I realize. If you earn $25,000 or more annually, then you are in the top 10% of the world's income earners. It's interesting. Here's a thought. For those of you like me that ever walked into your closet that is full of clothes, and you think, I have nothing to wear. There are countries that would say, we have a house for our clothes called the closet. There are people in this world, many of them, in fact, that would say, you have a house for your cars called a garage. There are a lot of people who couldn't even fathom or understand that you have a house for your money called a bank. What? In fact, if you have any of those things that I just mentioned, then you are in the top 5% of the world's wealthiest people. Now, this is interesting. If you earn more than $50,000 annually, you are in the top 1% of income earners in America. Now, I say that just to say that in the scheme of the world, or in the perspective of the world, that maybe I have more than I realize. But what's most important is just not knowing that, but knowing what the more is for. And that's where Jesus is concerned in our life, because he wants us to understand what the more is for. Now, you'd be a high school student, a college student, you're like, I'm a college student, man. Like, this message ain't for me. No, it is. It's for everybody. Yeah, you can clap, but Jesus still wants to talk to you. So it doesn't matter if you're newlyweds and times are tight, or you're retired, or no matter where you are. Jesus wants you to know what the more is for. There's a good chance that you live in a world that you have more than you realize. And when Paul's talking, he might just be talking to us. And so here's a few philosophies of money. And so 3 philosophies of money. The first one would be this. And by the way, it's easier to theorize this than to personalize it. You know, as we talk about some of these philosophies, it's way easier just to kind of theorize it than to personalize. And it's a kind of an ebb and flow, because I've been in all the seasons we're talking about at different times. It's not like I arrived spiritually and I was one and done, and now I've never struggled with any of these, just being transparent. So the first one is this. Philosophy of money is the greedy. And here's how I equate that definition of the greedy. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. What's yours is mine, and I'm going to take it. When I talk about greedy, here's kind of what I think about. Anybody ever seen Gollum in Lord of the Rings? Precious. Anybody? And if you follow the story, the longer he fixated on what was precious to him, the more hideous he got. It's kind of hard to look at. He's a scary little sucker, you know? And that's what I think about the greedy. Your world doesn't get bigger, it gets smaller. But you know why? It's because wherever your treasure is, your heart will follow. And if your treasure is you, you become fixated on you. And your world gets smaller, and it even becomes hideous to those around you, and you may not even know it. That's kind of what's scary. And Jesus understands when it comes to the greedy, you know, we don't admit I'm greedy. Hey everyone, Troy here, greedy. We say I'm opportunistic. That's what I am. And it's all about, I'm all about leveraging opportunities for sure. But a definition of someone who may be greedy or struggles with that in their heart is, I'm looking for opportunities to feed me. A generous person looks for opportunities to leverage to meet the needs of others. It's a big difference. And Jesus knows that all of our hearts isn't necessarily like this is the good category and this is the bad category. Hello, everyone. We all have tendencies to default to bad, to be greedy, to be precious, right? Mine. We all have that tendency to do that. That's why Jesus knows that generosity is what fights greed. That's why it's really important. That's why it's really important that if we're going to take our treasure somewhere, that we should take it and put it into the kingdom of heaven, because Jesus knows our heart follows. So that's one thought, the philosophy. Another one would be this: the guarded. What's mine is mine, and I'm going to keep it. You everybody seen Scrooge McDuck back in the old DuckTales, you know, like swimming in his gold coins? I'm going back to old school and illustrations today. Sorry, I'm 41. That's the way it is. So I think about Scrooge McDuck, right? What's mine is mine. Did you know one of the fastest growing industries in America is the storage unit business? The storage industry. It is a net worth of $10 billion in America. I think that's interesting that we pay pretty decent money to store things that won't fit in our house. And I'm not saying you shouldn't save. In fact, we go through a class here called Financial Peace by good old Dave Ramsey. And one of the things we talk about is knocking out debt and getting to a place where you can save for a rainy day. But it's not so that you can save to raise your standard of living. That's the American way. But the generous way is I'm going to knock out debt, get to a place, work hard so that I can get to the place where I'm not going to raise my standard of living, I'm going to raise my standard of giving. Then I'm ready for a rainy day and an emergency. But now I can look out for an opportunity to be generous, to meet the needs of others. And so we can be guarded. And it's good to save. It's not bad. But whenever you're so guarded that becomes a dam shutting off the flow of generosity, that will mess with your heart. You ever seen stagnant water? It gets disgusting. It needs to have a runoff place. And Jesus knows that within our hearts that we're not just to sit on it, not just to hoard it. He gives us, we got to know what the more is for. He gives us more so that we can look to meet the needs of other people. And then the third philosophy would be this, the giver, simply the giver. What's mine is God's, and I'm going to share it. What mine is God's, and I'm going to share it. Now, I want to wrap up our time with kind of just some thoughts. And we're 3 years old as a church, talking about a family of generosity. What we highlighted today on doing turkey drops yesterday to 45 families. And in fact, there were quite a few more people that we had left over because you guys were generous and were able to help more families in different areas, which is awesome. Honestly, y'all, I just hope that's the beginning. It's just a little bit of scratch in what I believe God wants to do, because we got to know what the more's for. And so here's what I assume. I don't think most hearts are like, I want to be greedy and guarded. Humbug. Like maybe some people have that, and I constantly need to have Jesus involved as I take steps in life to keep me generous. So there's that. But I think most people like, that's not me. I want to be generous. I just don't know if I'm able. The challenge of that is, if you're like, man, I'd like to be generous, I just can't yet. The challenge is, when can you? The hard part is starting. And that's not just for somebody else. That's for me. When I first got saved, and by the way, I think that when we talk about tithe as a church, scripturally, as I understand it, tithing is not giving, it's returning what's already God's. So it's not like saying, man, I'm a tither, I'm generous. No, that's obedience of saying, I give back to God. Now, you might hear that and go, well, that's old school principle, or that's just so, old, and we're in 21st century, Troy, wake up, but I read about Jesus, and Jesus didn't elevate tithe as if that to the religious leaders that thought that earned them merit in their relationship with God. They were tithing out even their herbs. They were such good rule followers that they tithed everything. Tithe is a tenth. So they were given 10% of not just their wealth, but everything. And they were dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's. They even took their little herb garden and tithe that. Here you go, God. And so Jesus comes on the scene, and he doesn't say don't do that. He says, yes, do that, tithe. But that's not earning you merit with God. That doesn't earn you salvation. You're for the show. Your heart's in the wrong place. So he doesn't eliminate it, but he doesn't elevate it either. But it's really the floor, not the ceiling. And it all comes down to this. If I'm a follower of Christ, and I've been on this journey myself, then I believe that, God, you gave me everything, and you ask for a portion back. And obedience is to give you a portion back. Now, we encourage people to say, hey, if 10 freaks you out and you've not started that yet, 10%, then just start at half. Start at 1. Because the point is, be systematic and intentional. The generous family I talked about up front, you know what? At one season of life, they did the hard work of trusting God with a percentage, working their way out of debt, and getting to the place where maybe it took them 5 years, but now they can be generous for 50. And it's worth the hard work. And that's all right. And so as we talk about that, for me, I went on a journey myself where I finally got to, it wasn't because somebody was telling me or trying to guilt me into it or trying to make me. I was now following Jesus. I wanted to be more like Jesus. And I figured out that this was a biblical principle of, you know what? I need to give back what God gave to me. Why is it 10%? I don't know. If it's all his, he could have asked for 20, 30, or 40. I guess it's because he's good that he just says, just give me 10 back. But there's a reason of obedience. It's not just that he commands us. The reason is he wants us to learn to live on 90 so that we trust him for the rest. Because he knew if we didn't have to trust him and we just lived on 100, that we wouldn't need him. But the reason he implemented this in the Old Testament is to take a group of people, the Israelites, on a journey of saying, hey, we're going to eat, God, we're going to need to work 7 days. And he said, no, I want you to take a day off. I want you to work 6, take a day off. Well, if we don't eat, we starve. We don't have a day to eat. And God's like, yeah, I know. But I want you to learn to trust me, that I'll make up the difference. That was true with the Sabbath. It was true with the tithe principle. And then it carries over to our hearts of generosity, that God, I need to realize that you're the one that gave me everything, and I give this back to you. And in obedience, God just loves the conversation. And it's all about a journey of trust. But that's where we start. But then we get to a place where we say, okay, if I have debt, man, I'm going to try to work hard. Listen, some people like me made past decisions that caused some of the consequences, and you're living in that. That would be my story. I know a lot of people that it was just the situation of life that they couldn't control that fed them where they are in life financially. So it's not about, trying to say bad or good on a situation. It's about saying, where's my heart? And do I trust God? And can I take a step? One of the reasons I talk about this is because one of the greatest ways that God has proved his existence in my life is through finances, y'all. Like I was following Jesus for just over a year, and I was trying to do some of these things that you're supposed to step through in obedience, and one of them was tithing, and it I was skeptical, and I was just like, that's just a pastor of a church, doesn't want your money. That's kind of what I thought. But I began to wrestle this through with God, and I was working 3-job part-time, and one of those was cleaning a church that had 100 little kid stools. You ever seen the cute little kid stools? They're real cute, adorable. They're not so adorable when they've been used. Like kids don't have the greatest aim. And so I was cleaning like 100 of these little stools. It was 11 o'clock when I got off that night. And I was trying to tithe, but I had wrote hot checks to the bank that didn't care about my tithe principle so much. And they were charging me overdraft fees, and because I was trying to tithe on hot checks. I'm not telling you should do that. That was probably not very smart. But I was trying to follow through with this principle, right? And so I ended up paying $300 in overdraft fees and being like, okay, I'm done. This isn't working. And so I prayed that night. My little car, it was a Saturn, had a little 5-speed Saturn missile, I called it. And my tires were so bald. The steel belt in the tire, it was so bald that all 4 of them were showing on the outside. And I had no money to buy tires. In fact, I'm writing hot checks to try to tithe. So I'm like, God, where are you? And so I prayed that night, like literally said this to God. I was kind of emoting. I said, I'm done. And I don't even have money to buy tires, and my tires are about to blow up. I left that job. This is a true story. I left that job, and I'm driving home. And as I'm driving, I noticed there's a highway patrol group of cars that are chasing this car in a pursuit. And it wasn't me. This was after Jesus' day. So they weren't chasing me this time. So I was watching. That's a good thing. And so here they are. They go by. And as I pass, that car they're chasing jumps the median and then begins to come. I see my rearview mirror coming up behind me. And so one of the troopers were in front of us, and it jumped the median and kind of skid onto the highway. And he jumped out of his car, and he shoots this gun across the street that has like this big, long porcupine-looking thing that like inflates nails. Kind of interesting. And so they do that to try to stop cars they're chasing. So just as that car they're chasing goes by, and I'm right with it too, he shoots that thing across the road, and we both run over it, and all 4 of my tires, flat. So it's on its rims, and sparks are flying, and it keeps going, and they all chase it. So it's just me on the side of the road with 4 flat tires. And I was like, am I just existing for your humor? You needed someone, just to smite, So I'm kicking not tires because they're flat. I'm kicking my rims, and I'm like, really? Seriously, I just prayed. And you're like, ha, ha, ha. And that's how some of you see God. And I did too. And so, a few minutes went by, and I'm like sitting there. I'm like, this is before cell phone days, what am I going to do? Well, eventually, here came a car, and it was that highway patrolman, and he pulled up. He said, man, I'm so sorry about that. I'm like, yeah. And so he gave me his card, and he said, man, I knew if I was going to get that one, I was going to have to get yours. I apologize. He said, but take this card to any tire shop, and the state will buy you 4 new tires. Oh. So the next morning, I went to Missouri, big old tires. And I went to Big Old Tires, and I said, hey, apparently the state's buying me tires. Let me see what you got. And I bought the most expensive tires I could put on that car. It was awesome. True story. And I tell you that story because since that moment, I've always given 10 or more %, and God has always been faithful. Now, that's just my story. I don't advise you to try to fabricate that. It may not work out very well. And I will tell you this. If you think the reward for being obedient to God is always He will materialistically bless you, then that you have an incorrect theology. Because the reward isn't always, I do this, cha-ching, and then God, ding, 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 yay. He's good, and so He loves to bless us. But the reward is our trust in Him, that He will provide for us. And as we talk about generosity and this whole thought, bring it back to the church. I think there's a myth, and maybe I just make this up, but I have conversations that prove my myth to be true with neighbors and people that don't attend church. And they say something like this, that church, here's the myth, church is for church people. Church is for church people. I'm not one of those. One of the things a generous church does is it thinks about those that aren't even a part of it yet. When Jesus died, at least for the generous family that he died to create, it's really an interesting organization, the church on earth, because it's one of the only organizations that I know of that solely exists for those that aren't even a part of it yet. And sometimes people have a myth, and it's called churches for church people. In other words, I have a neighbor that says, I'm not religious, man. That's good for you all, and kind of respects some of the values, but that's not me. So that's a myth. Here's what I think sometimes is a truth. Many people want to connect with God, but many times church people make it difficult. That's a hard truth, and that's not for me to point a finger at. I point it back to myself sometimes because of my greed. Greedy sometimes does this. We make it difficult in this sense. Sometimes churches get together, and instead of helping people take steps, they don't even know it, but they remove steps. And sometimes in our meetings together, and this isn't Rock Hills Church by no means, but I'm going to always look to a culture that we want to always keep of a family that's generous. And sometimes without even knowing it, church isn't for church people, by the way, it's for everybody. And sometimes we can make it difficult for those that aren't just wanting to attend, but would love to experience a life-changing God. Because the truth of it is I meet a lot of people that move to Manhattan, and I've heard this many times. I heard it today, in fact, before the message. And then I had to say, hey, I'm about to talk about this. I'm literally going to say what you just said. But no, it's not because of you just said it. I've been planning on it a week, okay? And it is this. Manhattan has a lot of churches. I think there's 52 to 54 of them, in fact. And when I hear that, people say, Manhattan has a lot of churches. I say, yeah. But isn't it interesting that 65% of the population aren't attending one? And the truth is that me included, when I get greedy, it becomes about me. And without even knowing it sometimes, when I get together, even in church, and it becomes about me, I'm like, feed me, feed me, feed me. I got needs, y'all. I got needs. Meet my needs. Meet my needs. And I can become like, precious. And sometimes when I do that, instead of helping people take steps, because that's what generous people do, how can we help meet needs? We remove steps. The early church had this difficulty of, hey, is the gospel really for Gentiles, which means for people that weren't Jewish? And the early church started, and they're like, I don't know, man. Is it really for other people that aren't inside the Jewish family? I mean, is this really possible? They had this big meeting. It was very historical. And they get in the meeting, and here's the conclusion. In Acts 15, verse 19, they said, we have determined that we should not make it difficult for those turning to God. And that passes down to us, that we should not make it difficult. And the second year that I was a follower of Christ, I met this dude who was homeless. I invited him to this church we were visiting. And we went in, and he told me as we ate breakfast before we went to church, and I invited him, he said, man, I have really bad migraines, so I wear sunglasses. And I'm like, that's, sorry you have that. And so we walk into this church, and we were visiting this church, and we no more walked into the lobby, and this guy came up and stood in front of this guy and said, son, we don't wear sunglasses in church. You need to take those off. And, I'm still growing in my faith, but I was really new in my faith. And so, it was all I could do to not run his head through a wall, But then I just thought, well, then I'll be as wrong as he is if I hurt him, so that won't be good. But I just said, sir, I believe church is for everybody. He's with me today. He's with me. And so that guy left, and that guy with me that I invited took his sunglasses off and looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, I told you, I'm not a church person. And I said, yes, you are. And then I tried to, recoup the moment and tie a bow on it, and I don't know if I did. But sometimes we can make it more difficult. But let me tell you how we can help put the steps on the ladder. When we're a generous family, when you and I are a generous family and we come not just to get, that's part of it, but we come more to give and to look our arrows out and to say, how can I make the experience for somebody else better than it is for me? You know what we do? We become a generous family that begins to put steps on the ladder, not just so that people can get it up here in attendance and go, look at us, celebrate Jesus, celebrate. It's not that we can all just have a powwow up here on the top of the ladder and look how spiritual we are. No. It's that we would help people get a better view of Jesus and experience his life-changing presence because of our generosity. And Jesus knows that wherever we put our treasure, guess what? It's going to follow our heart. And if you want to be connected to God spiritually, you better have a treasure that's more valuable than your wallet. Because God knows us and he loves us. In fact, he gave his most prized possession to us. Whether we responded to him or not, he went ahead and gave, because he so loved this world that he gave his one and only son. Let me pray for you. Lord, I love you. I thank you, God, just for the opportunity today to talk about generosity and do it with joy. Not guilt, but I just know how freeing it is to live a generous life. And that's all by your grace. And I thank you, God, that you know our hearts. And when you talked about generosity, you understood that it would cause us to live free lives. And it would also cause us to help other people know you. And so, Lord, my prayer is that for Rock Hills Church, and there's generous people here you've given already, God, that are helping us do what we do. But I pray that we would have a legacy of being a radically generous family. That even people that may not believe what we believe or do what we do would still look and not be able to not say, they'd be able to look and say, look how generous those people are, because they're looking to meet the needs of others, not just their own. Lord, I pray if anybody's here today and they've not yet taken that step, that first step in a relationship with you, I pray today would be the day that maybe they would invite you in, because you're a generous God who sent your son, that we'd have life. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.